A very good evening to you. There was a high-profile defeat late this afternoon in the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, which otherwise were largely ignored by voters. The former Deputy Prime Minister, Lord John Prescott, unexpectedly lost out in Humberside to the Tory Matthew Grove.
Most of the 41 results have now been declared, but it's become clear that the commissioners being sworn in have been selected by, for the most part, a dismal turnout, under a sixth of those eligible to vote. That's triggering a review by the Electoral Commission. The government admits it's disappointed, but insists that the outcome is still legitimate and that the commissioners do have a mandate.
Well, here are the results so far. 40 police and crime commissioners have been elected, with one still being counted. That's Devon and Cornwall. The
Conservatives have won 15, including that surprise victory in Humberside.
Labour have 13 commissioners, including Greater Manchester, South Yorkshire and the West Midlands.
And 12 independent commissioners have been elected. Our home editor, Mark Easton, reports.
This ballot box, completely empty, may come to symbolise the first ever Police and Crime Commissioner elections of England and Wales. The lowest peacetime turnout in British electoral history left staff at some counts twiddling their thumbs. In parts of the country, almost 90% of those eligible to vote didn't.
Angus Stuart Macpherson is duly elected.
Conservative Angus Macpherson claims his place as the first of the new commissioners to be elected. But the winner in Wiltshire saw less than 5.5% of registered voters pick him as their first choice for the job. A review of what went wrong is to be conducted by the Electoral Commission. One former chief constable has described the process as catastrophic.
I thought the bad turnout would have been somewhere below 25%. I'd feared 20, but 15 is appalling. And it really should cause those at the head of the Home Office, and particularly ministers, to reflect on their position.
The idea is to make police more accountable. Each of the 41 police force areas in England and Wales outside London now has a commissioner, paid between £65,000 and £100,000 a year to set the police budget and to hire, or if necessary, fire the chief constable. Locals say this polling station in Newport saw precisely 0 voters turn up yesterday.
I haven't seen any info, so how can I vote for something I don't know about?
I didn't understand what the election was about, so I didn't vote.
If I'd had flyers through the door, maybe I would have taken a little bit more notice.
So some say there wasn't enough information. The fact the elections took place in November was also blamed. But 10 times the normal number of spoiled ballot papers, like this one, suggests some voters were worried about the police becoming politicised. Elected PCCs were the centrepiece of the Conservative Party's police reforms at the last election, and they insisted the policy be included in the coalition agreement. The almost emphatic indifference of the public to the idea is an embarrassment, particularly for the Home Secretary, who must now defend spending an estimated £100 million on the project, while demanding cuts to police budgets.
So are you saying this was money well spent?
I'm saying that I think the Police and Crime Commissioners are an important policy because I think they will make a difference to people, they will make a difference to policing, and they, crucially, across the country, I expect them all to work with the police to cut crime.
They chose to spend £100 million on these elections rather than spend it on 3,000 police officers instead. That's bad for policing, it's bad for democracy, and it's also bad for the taxpayer too.
Let's return now to the Police and Crime Commissioner elections. As we mentioned earlier, with one result still outstanding, 12 of the 40 new Police and Crime Commissioners are independent candidates. Among the winners, a number of former police officers and one of Wales's most senior barristers. They also include a pilot and magistrate, Ron Ball, who won in Warwickshire. Alan Hardwick, who will be the Lincolnshire Police and Crime Commissioner, is a former TV presenter. And Kevin Hurley, who won in Surrey, is a former Territorial Army and Metropolitan Police officer who served in Iraq in 2003 and 2004. Well, we're joined here in the studio by John Collins from the Police Foundation, and in our lead studio is Mike Pannett, who's an author and former police officer. Thank you both of you for coming along to talk to us. John, I'll begin with you. I mean, we want to focus not so much on the poor voter turnout in this discussion, but at the advantages and disadvantages of being an independent candidate and what you think independent candidates who have been successful might bring to this role over and above those who have the backing of a big political machine.
I think the big surprise of the day has been the number of independent candidates who have been elected. Most pundits and experts, including myself, didn't expect very many independents to be elected. In fact, we've got 12 out of the 41 altogether who have won through in areas right across the country. I think the independent candidates, by their nature, are very different. They'll bring very different experience from each other. It's very difficult to assume they've all got the same characteristics. Some are ex-police officers who obviously bring a lot of experience of policing to the role. Others have got a wide range of backgrounds. As you mentioned, one's an airline pilot. They come from all walks of life. But what they will bring is a fresh perspective. They'll hopefully bring some new ideas. And they are distinct and independent from the political parties, which is something that polling has consistently shown over the years that the public really want.
Mike, would it be fair to say that the independent candidates who've won have had to work harder than those who've had that party political backing?
Well, of course, that was the big concern, and I was really quite vocal about that concern, you know, the independents being disadvantaged. But what's really sort of shocked me is not only it shocked me at the sort of the very, very low turnout. It was even a worse turnout than I predicted. But the fact that a number of independents dropped out who would have made fantastic police crime commissioners, and because they felt that their voice wouldn't be heard, they didn't have the funding of big political parties. And you know, the one thing I really didn't want this to turn it into was a party political election, but unfortunately it had. But well done to the dozen or so independents which will take up their post, and thankfully some of them with experience, which they'll be able to really sort of drive through the reforms which I felt would be better served with a totally independent candidates that represent all sides of party politics, not just one side.
And I can now also bring into this discussion Andrew Russell, who's a professor of politics at Manchester University, joining us from Salford. Glad you could make it along to join in the discussion. We had intended to have all three of you from the beginning. Professor Russell, if I could begin asking you, do you think actually these independent candidates who've won were, to look at the flip side of the coin, given an advantage in that a lot of the voters we've heard from, those who did make the effort to go out and vote, said they wanted an independent because they didn't want the role of police and crime commissioner to be politicised?
Yeah, well, the first thing to say, I suppose, is that the supplementary vote would have played into the hands of independents who would pick up a lot of second preferences. But also, I think it is fair to say that when the public thought about the initial view of what the police and crime commissioners were, the idea that they would be party politicians was perhaps anathema to that idea of the kind of big society. So I think in many ways we saw a kind of anti-politics vote going to the independents, and I think you might say that was part of the reason behind their relative success.
John Collins from the Police Foundation, as you mentioned, you know, we've got independent candidates who've been successful from a variety of backgrounds, including from a policing background. You know, can we assume that just because someone is from a policing background that this person is going to be any less political? I don't suppose we can we?
I think it's not about people's background, it's about how they act now they're in the job, and it's very important that they make sure they represent every element of the community in the area that they've been elected to serve. I mean, I think when we're thinking about police officers who have taken on, ex-police officers who have now taken on this role as PCCs, the important thing for them will be to remain independent from the police and provide that oversight and accountability for the police, and to make sure they stay out of operational matters, because the temptation for people with a long police career behind them will be to get involved in operational matters, and they absolutely should avoid that temptation.
Are they less likely to innovate, to have new ideas compared to people from other backgrounds?
Well, the candidates who I've seen have all got their own ideas. They've all got fresh ideas they want to drive through, and I hope they do. But I think they just need to be careful to remember that it's their role to set the strategy, the budget, the overall direction, but not to try and drive through their own ideas on an operational level, maybe based on their experience when they were in the police.
The Home Office, Mike Pannett in Leeds, was saying earlier that actually the success of these elections shouldn't be judged on the turnout. It should be judged on what the police and crime commissioners deliver in the 3.5 years they have until next time round, the next elections. I mean, do you think that's a fair comment? Is the Home Office just saying this because the turnout was so bad?
I think, look, the one person I feel very sorry for this evening is Damien Green. He's trying to defend the indefensible. The turnout has been absolutely appalling. And I think, you know, we look back, and I made it quite clear, I was really concerned, political parties getting involved in policing. And you know, where did the last policing minister go? He disappeared before this election results. And the very person at the think tank, Blair Gibbs, disappeared as well. Now, that really worried me, but I think going forward now, I am pleased in a way that we've got some independents in there who will have a real grasp of what it's like to look at nationally as well. You know, look at what the rural communities are needing, look at what the city, the urban people need, and I think that's a real test. And having that knowledge of actually having done the job, I think they'll be able to assist and look at where the real finances need to be put to make people who are living in their particular areas, the communities, a much better and safer place to live. And I think that's a positive thing.
Well, developing that idea, I want to ask all three of you. I'll begin with you, Professor Andrew Russell, if I may. Given the poor turnout, given the lack of engagement, it seems, from the public, what can the elected police and crime commissioners now do to sort of turn that around, to start to build the relationship, to show that they are going to make a really, you know, good effort at this job to work with the Chief Constable and to listen to the public that they serve?
Well, I think it's very difficult, and I think they've been dealt quite a weak hand because they start in the job with the knowledge everybody knows that turnout was low, and that's kind of going to define them in the first days of the job, perhaps even the first term of the job, and indeed that, you know, the second election is going to be about will turnout improve, and that will kind of undermine authority. But you know, there's a serious job to be done here. There's a serious kind of liaison between the citizens and the public about making, giving an accountable and electable kind of force, and it's a very serious test, and it's one that's been undermined by the whole way that this process has been run. You know, from decisions like making the deposit £5,000, for instance, the non-free mail out, just made the lack of the free mail out made sure that political parties were the only organisations that could kind of, you know, try to contact people in fairly orthodox ways, and even a couple of the independents, let's not forget, have fairly close links with political parties.
John Collins, Andrew Russell says they've been dealt a weak hand to start. What are your thoughts on that, particularly, of course, on the relationship between the commissioners and the chief constables?
I think it's right that the very low levels of turnout, which already have been pretty dismal, are going to raise some questions about the credibility and legitimacy of these incoming police and crime commissioners. I think the most important thing is they recognise they don't have a public mandate just to implement the policies that they ran on. They now need to start a serious conversation with the public in their local areas to find out what their policing priorities should be, and that should be a long-running conversation over the whole term to make sure that they engage with all elements of the community in their area.
And do you think, just in a word, will that be easier now that there is an actual face in the, you know, a person who people can identify with, this is our commissioner, rather than a list of candidates who they seem not to have had very much information about?
I think it will potentially be easier, but I think there's now a lot on the shoulders of the Police and Crime Commissioner. They need to get out there and do it. Some of them represent some very big areas, and it's going to be a real challenge. So they need to think of innovative and interesting ways to get out there and engage with the community. And
final thought, Mike Pannett, what are the key jobs, first key jobs now for these new commissioners?
It's quite obvious that a lot of the public don't know who the elected even police crime commissioners are. They need to get out there, they need to listen, and that's what the whole process was about. Listen to what the concerns of the communities. And as I say, I'm very careful here because some of the areas of policing are huge, both urban and rural. They need to have a real good grasp on what the real demands are and what really affects the people, and then work, if you like, with the chief constables to be able to deliver what the public are wanting. And that's across the whole range, whether it's an issues with burglary, whether it's a question of issues of sentencing, they're going to be the voice and, if you like, the spokesperson of the public, that they have been elected, and I use that term quite a bit concerned because of the very poor turnout, but they've been elected democratically to represent the communities that they're going to serve. And it's not going to be an easy job, but they need to get out there and really do the best. And there's going to be a lot of people looking on as to exactly how they're going to perform in this role. And again, the mechanics are not in place, the mechanisms are not in place if they're underperforming. And so there's lots of things that haven't been thought out. So there's lots to learn in the job going forward. But the most important thing is looking after the safety of the public and the police officers doing the jobs.
OK, Mike Pannett in Leeds, Andrew Russell in Salford and John Collins here in the studio with me. Thank you very much.